Now, when we spoke a little bit earlier on, you touched on a number of issues. In terms of the ANC's tactics document that is expected to be unpacked tomorrow, what exactly can we expect?
Well, a very good evening to you once again, Tabile. Well, we now know that that media briefing, which was scheduled for early into this evening, will now be taking place tomorrow. But basically, that strategy and tactics document is certainly what we're all looking forward to, because that will certainly dissect, one of the issues relating to money politics, for example, and factionalism within the African National Congress. Those are some of the things that have really come across over the past few days in the press conferences that we have been attending, as the ANC has been dissecting itself over the past 2 days in trying to establish what the major concerns are and what has led to, for example, the ANC losing so much support over the past couple of years. So that strategy and tactics document will really dissect, for example, when you look at the trends, not just in South Africa, but on the African continent as well. The ANC would not want to find itself in a situation where you have a liberation movement which, after the attainment of democracy, is on a downward spiral and loses the relevance that it has had in that fight from apartheid to democracy after achieving so many gains. And then you see, as we saw with the press conference that was given by the Secretary General of the ANC, Gwede Mantashe, where he spoke about some of the actions of ANC leaders that have contributed towards this poor state of the ANC today. But also earlier on this afternoon, the Deputy President as well went out on a walkabout on an exhibition here at Nasrec as well. And he was quite frank with the journalists there, Tabile, where he pointed out to the fact that the ANC delegates attending this policy conference need to come up with solutions to the current state of the African National Congress. It would be all good and well to try and find policies, good policies for the ANC to put into place, but implementation remains one of the key concerns for the African National Congress. Let's take a listen to what the Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say earlier on.
This was a document which was approved by the NEC. Initially, some of the delegates said, no, maybe it should not be presented. And finally, it was agreed that it should be presented. It should also form the basis to enrich the discussions that are going to ensue. And that document essentially looks at the African National Congress quite critically. It looks at what is ailing the African National Congress. But what is good about the document is that it immediately says to all of us as members of the ANC that we should just go beyond just raising issues that are problematic for the ANC. We should immediately seek solutions and begin to look at the solutions of how we can correct the mistakes, the weaknesses of the ANC, and find ways of strengthening the ANC.
That's going to continue before the ANC can go into other issues relating to, for example, the condition that the South African economy finds itself in. And one of those that will be watching that very closely is the Black Business Council, and how perhaps the ANC would be able to come up with policies to ensure that black business thrives. Let me chat now to George Sibulela, who's with the Black Business Council. Thank you very much for your time this evening. What kind of policies would you want to see as the Black Business Council that would take black business from where it is now into another era?
Look, thank you for inviting me. Firstly, we have already made it very public that the financial services sector is in the center of transformation. And we have noted that little of change has happened within that sector. And we have begun to challenge the status quo. And this is what we're pushing for ANC to say. We want the entire financial services sector to be transformed. And we don't want talk shop. We want to see practical actions and radical targets to be achieved. We have had financial services charters. They have never worked, they have never been achieved, and government did nothing to penalize those organizations. We have seen little transformation in the insurance sector. If I tell you today that less than 1% of the total ownership of insurance is black, but sadly, 90% of the customers of those companies are black. That already tells you there's a problem.
You can already dissect when you look at, some of the complaints from black business. One of the major things that they talk about is funding. Access to funding for black business is still almost non-existent. Is that part of what you're challenging the ANC to change?
Look, firstly, there's a number of challenges on the funding side. Firstly, number one is that there is no form of any seed capital for funding for black business or small business in totality. There's still a continuation of concentration on very successful medium to high large organizations. And because of risk, all of them argue risk. But if you look in many parts of successful countries in the world, the Googles of this world were small companies. They were started from scratch. They were funded through venture capital. And I think until we understand that high-risk funding is required in this country, we are going to see little growth of small businesses. And that's really our message.
But there'd certainly be a reflection of that. For example, if you look at the JSE, that has been very much in the spotlight, where you look at the JSE on its own, black versus white. That certainly paints a picture of very little that has been done to change what would say has been the status quo for too long.
You're 100% correct. Since 20 years ago, we have always said the transformation of the JSE has always been in the 2 to 3% transformation of the black-owned entities in that level. So, what is the challenge? The challenge is, firstly, you require capital to buy equity stakes in those businesses. Now we're talking large transactions. Where would you find capital to acquire a 40 billion rand market cap company? The second thing is, we have to begin to utilize our state-owned institutions to lever on bridging the equity contribution for the acquisition of stake in those listed companies. For example, the PIC can come in, set up black-owned private equity funds that will act as black-owned entities with funding. Because what you literally require is equity contribution, the rest you can get.
But what needs to be done then to, if I could call it, to open up the industry to ensure that, a black business benefits more? But I guess you can't talk about benefit if the door itself is not opened for you to go in. But what exactly are the policies that you think need to change coming out of this? It shouldn't just be a talk shop, and the existing policies are obviously not benefiting a black business, as you say. What are some of the strategic things you think perhaps the ANC can come up with to ensure that all that has been plaguing black business for far too long, those changes can be effected, and black business you can start seeing black business benefit?
Bear in mind that if we have the ANC in its policy to say, this is how we would like to see transformation of policies taking place, then it becomes easier for government institutions to implement that policy, because it has to be approved mostly.
But implementation is a problem, Mr. Sibila. Let me just cut you there. Implementation is a problem. It's one of the things that we've been hearing throughout this policy conference. While there may be policies, you're saying they're not working, implementation of them as well is something that seems to be a very big problem. You may put the policies there, but if they're not properly implemented, there's a proper oversight to ensure that those policies are able to benefit black business, then it absolutely doesn't matter.
There's two issues that are here. One is there are good policies that requires implementation, which requires monitoring, and which requires penalty for those that don't implement.
And that's not happened.
That's not happening. So often the accounting officers must take responsibility of non-compliance, non-delivery of the policies that are, we believe that, sufficient to be implemented. The second thing is, as I said, there are policies that are just written as theory. The issue is we need policies that can enforce so that people that are sitting in parliament, it can become easier for them to understand that it is nothing else but transformation. Just to give you an example, if we don't have the Financial Services Board, for example, not to enforce into the financial services industry that, for example, 51% of all the new licenses that are going to be issued in conjunction with the Reserve Bank must be issued to black-owned companies. We will never see a black-owned bank unless you buy one with a lot of capital. But I'm talking just the establishment of the first 2 or 3 black-owned licenses. FSB has got the power to do that. The second thing, if any financial institution is just going to operate normally by just complying to the charter, it becomes a problem. But imagine if FSB would have said to this institution, your license condition from now on every year is based on the targets we have put forward as per the law in order for you to achieve those number of targets. Then you can be penalized or we can retrieve the license. These are the issues that we want to see the ANC putting as part of the policy. They're practical, they can be achieved, they can be enforced, and they can be measured. That's what we would like to see.
Would you say the ANC has failed? It has failed to put in the proper policies thus far. And do you have any hope, perhaps, that after this, there have been many talk shops about how black business is suffering. The current government has also put in an entire ministry to ensure that small business is looked after. But are those changes significant? Do you think that the ANC till this point has failed to ensure that black business is able to penetrate the market, which many would say in the majority is dominated by white people, and has failed to ensure that black business is able to even just enter the door to conduct business?
Black business has not progressed. The biggest...
Has the ANC failed?
The ANC has not implemented the policies, some of the policies that have... If you recall that the triple PFA has been the song of the day. We don't like this 90-10 principle of what National Treasury is implementing. We wanted this triple PFA to be repealed long time ago. It has never been done, even today. What is the problem? Why can't we repeal this law? What is the problem not to repeal this law in the interest of transformation? Because 90-10 is logic. It tells you that if I have enough capital, then I can buy, I can play on price. Therefore, the smaller guy cannot play on price. That's the logic. We always argued this point for a very long time. Secondly, we cannot have, for so many years, the largest procurement budget of this country to be benefiting only the few. It's impossible. And the only way we can do, we can't even say 30% of the total government procurement spend.
So the issue of procurement needs to change.
The growth of, remember, the growth of any business depends on two things. Depends on capital, because you are able to fund goods, you are able to fund your working capital. It depends on the market. And the market, we're not talking to say what is the size of the market. We're talking about what is the size of the contract you have received. Just to give you the difficulty, black industrialization, you can only become a black industrialist only on two things. You have to have a large contract in order to become a black industrialist.
But the Department of Trade and Industry, for example, has championed black industrialists. Is that not sufficient to try and ensure that, black business or young aspirant business does enter the market? But are these other challenges that you're speaking of really the wall that covers whether you will be successful or not as a small black business?
Yeah, well, the logic is, as I say, a black industrialist. Let's take a practical example.
Yeah, we don't have much time.
Yeah, in somebody to establish an industry or the manufacturing plant, you cannot, financially doesn't make sense for anybody to fund that project. You have to have a long-term contract. You cannot tender for 3 years or 5 years. You would not get funding anyway. So the logic is you need National Treasury or true government to ring fence certain specific contract to establish industrialists. Because then you can go up to 10 to 20 years contract. And the second thing is you need enough capital to fund those contracts and to fund the project.
All right, which is not happening at this point. George Tibulela, thank you
you
very much for your time from the Black Business Council, saying that one of the things they will be championing is to ensure that the ANC does come up with policies to ensure that it makes it easier for black business to do business. As it currently stands, he mentions quite a number of challenges there where he says the ANC needs to improve on some of those policies. But I'm afraid that's all we have time for this evening. Thank you very much to my colleagues as well, Aldrin Sampier, as well as Lucanio Kalata, who've been with us throughout the course of the day. Well, that's it from us here at Nasrec. We'll be back bright and early tomorrow from Morning Live. I will be with you live here from Nasrec, where we'll have quite a number of guests to dissect the 4th day of the ANC's National Policy Conference. And we'll certainly bring you that press conference live as well on the strategy and tactics, which will be presented to the media by Natim Tetra. Thank you very much for your time. Have a great evening.
Thank you very much, Crisalda. Great updates there from our team at the ANC's National Policy Conference at Nasrec in the south of Johannesburg. More news coming.